This is the tale of Diana, a small boat with a big story. In 1919, fresh from serving in the Royal Artillery, 26-year-old Harold Bennett bought himself a boat to help him in his work as the shipping agent and the local Lloyd's agent, passing ship arrivals and departures information onto Lloyd's Insurance in London and handling claims. We think that his new boat had been a motor launch on board a German merchant ship. With her plain whaleless stem and square stern, she was 22 feet long and 7 foot in the beam, and fitted with a modern oil-powered engine. She was considered to be one of the fastest boats on the island. He called her Diana. On the 2nd of October 1925, the French coaster, the SS Atala, ran into thick fog just off the southeast coast of Jersey. She struck rocks off La Roque, causing an 8-metre gash in her hull. Water poured in and she finally ran aground in Grouville Bay, near Seymour Tower. The following day, Albert Barnes and his team used Diana as a working platform to cut a hole in the side of the ship, to drain her and then weld plates over the gash to get her afloat again. On the night of the 26th of December 1926, the SS Ribblesdale broke her anchor off Ronay and ran aground near Bouilly Bay. The crew abandoned ship and all made it safely to shore. The following day, Harold Bennett took Diana from St Helier to get the crew's personal effects and to assess the damage. Once the ship had been declared beyond repair, the shipbroker W.G. Bellingham appointed Frank Lawrence to strip everything movable from the vessel and to carry out the salvage job. In addition to the Ribblesdale's own boats, he also chartered the Diana from Harold Bennett. In the late spring of 1927, Bennett had Frank Lawrence give Diana an overhaul. Working on the beach at Bouilly Bay, her old square transom was taken off and replaced with a more stylish V-shaped stern, and she had a new Parsons 4-stroke paraffin engine fitted. She could now reach speeds of up to 8.5 knots. In 1929, Diana was entered onto the British Register of Merchant Shipping and allocated the official number 161182. In late July 1936, the Jersey Airways flying boat, Cloud of Iona, went missing in fog on a flight between Guernsey and Jersey. 13 days later, wreckage was found on the western side of the Minkies Reef, about 15 miles southwest of Jersey. All 10 passengers and crew were lost. Harold Bennett and the Diana took part in the search and brought some of the wreckage back from the Minkies. Even after the famous evacuation of Dunkirk in May 1940, there were still over 200,000 Allied troops in western France. Just before the French surrender, it was decided to bring them back to Britain. Altogether, 191,870 British and Allied troops were evacuated during Operation Ariel, largely through the ports of Cherbourg, St Malo, Brest, Saint-Nazaire and La Rochelle. Boats from Jersey were involved in the evacuation of St Malo. Members of the company of town pilots went to St Malo with 8 cargo boats to assist with evacuation of the main body of troops. On Sunday the 16th and Monday the 17th of June, 21,474 military personnel were evacuated. 20 small boats, mostly leisure craft, sailed from the island to assist in the evacuation and to pick up the demolition team once they had destroyed the port facilities.
We were the nearest Admiralty-controlled craft available, so we were ordered for the St Malo evacuation of the naval demolition party. First trip was at 4 a.m. on Monday, June the 17th. We arrived at St Malo 7:20 a.m. and reported to the Naval Control, who then ordered us to return to St Helier with 10 RAF personnel who were trapped there, and we arrived home with them at 10 p.m. Strictly ordered to return to St Malo by 2 p.m. on Tuesday the 18th. As we were approaching, a large fire was raging ashore. The last 2 miles from the breakwater, we passed the 17th St Helier Yacht Club volunteer evacuation boats, or Passage for St Helier. Our armament was a double-pound Lewis mounted machine gun and 4 revolvers, we were fitted that out for the Dunkirk trip. Our skipper reported our arrival and standby at the slipway to the demolition naval officer at the lock gates where the explosive charges had been set. The only other Jersey boat who stayed with us was the Harbour Office launch, Duchess of Normandy. Next thing, the lock gates were blown up to stop the oncoming Germans having the use of the inner dock. There was also a second explosion at the power station. When the officer and ratings returned to the slipway, about 14 in all, the officer in charge questioned an English school teacher who was left behind and left everything behind and came down the slip begging us for a trip out of St Malo. But as our skipper was not qualified to give permission, we asked her to stay until the officer arrived, and then he would have a chat with her and he allowed her onto the trip. I bet that was a relief to her.
I bet it was.
It was a fairly rough trip crossing, especially near the Cock Beacon. We took in tow one of the yacht club volunteers who had broken down. I can't remember her name, but with our tow we stayed behind and shepherded the whole fleet until well past the Minkeys. Then we put on our speed and arrived at the Victoria Pier at 9:30 p.m, still with our tow, of course.
When you were in St Malo, had the Germans already arrived?
No, they were not in the town, but we were told, it must have been by our demolition party, that the Germans had captured a radar station on the outskirts of St Malo. Recently at the museum, I was very interested to read the names of the 17 St Helier Yacht Club boats who bravely volunteered for the evacuation. It was boats and crews very well known to us: Clang the Second, St Clement, Marmia, Desiree, Lenwaro, Girl Joyce, Solace, Pearson, Lindelay, Teaser, Cruther, Fiona, Calouse, Sibel, Daddy, Diana and Laurie. Not forgetting the Harbour Office launch, Duchess of Normandy, on which I had been engineer for many years.
Following the liberation in May 1945, Diana resumed her former career as the Lloyd's agent's boat until August 1949, when Harold Benet died. The following February, she was sold to Philip John Leclerc of La Roque and moved to the east coast harbours of La Roque and Goree. In March 1993, Jack LeGraley of La Roque bought Diana from the estate of P.G. Leclerc and set about restoring her with the aid of his grandson, Chris Le Masrier. On the 24th of June 2000, Chris Le Masrier, Steve Luce and John Hayes sailed Diana to St Malo as part of the 60th anniversary flotilla to mark the events of 1940. In November 2014, after well over a century of active sailing, Diana was taken out of the water for the last time. Finally, in 2016, it was decided she would become the centrepiece of an exhibition representing the small boating community of the island. It was a fascinating exhibition to be involved with, and we hope you enjoy it.